Without a doubt, guys, these echo weapons are some of the best Bungie has ever made. Now, a lot of the attention has been on the rocket-assisted sidearm, Aberrant Action, and for good reason. It's a very, very good sidearm. However, we also had another weapon that dropped with Act 2 called Corrasion. This is an arc heavy burst pulse rifle. So think things like Nullify and Aisha's Care. Two weapons I very much like, and one of the strongest archetypes inside of PvE, but also a pretty good archetype inside of PvP. The question is, does Corrasion offer something that competes against these other pulse rifles and of course other weapons in general? Now before we get into the perks, let's take a quick look at the stats. Corrasion at base has 75 range, 32 stability, 33 handling, 36 reload speed, 40 aim assist, 18 zoom, and 17 airborne effectiveness. Now comparing that to our other legendary 2 burst pulse rifles, Corrasion does fall behind, which kind of makes sense. This is a seasonal weapon, or I guess in this case an episode weapon, whereas Aisha's Care comes from Trials of Osiris. You could of course get the Adept version, and Nullify comes from the Raid. But with that out of the way, let's talk perks. This is where Corrasion really does shine. In column 3, we have Air Trigger, Perfect Float, Pugilist, Eddy Current, Enlightened Action, Perpetual Motion, and High Impact Reserves. Then in our 4th column, we have Eye of the Storm, High Ground, Frenzy, Swashbuckler, Voltshot, One for All, and Focus Fury. Now I actually play with this pulse rifle a bunch inside of PvP, and yes, I have a lot to say about its PvP performance, because I do believe this archetype is pretty solid inside of PvP, but there is definitely a clear winner here amongst the 2 burst pulse rifles. With that being said though, let's talk PvE, as there are some standout perks here. First up in column 3, we've got things like Enlightened Action, which reads that dealing damage improves reload speed and handling. Now each weapon hit is going to grant 1 stack of Enlightened Action, and will max out at 12 stacks. With this being a 2-round burst pulse rifle, this means each burst will give us 2 stacks, and therefore allowing us to hit maximum benefits after 6 bursts. Now at our max of 12 stacks, this gives us plus 50 reload speed and plus 50 handling, which takes our reload at base, taking 93 frames to do a full animation, to only 62 with max stacks of Enlightened Action. I personally like Enlightened Action. It doesn't require a kill. It's something that you can benefit just from landing hits, with the enhanced version increasing those stat bonuses to plus 55 reload speed at max stacks, as well as plus 55 handling. Now this doesn't really make a big difference frame wise. We're talking like a 1 frame difference from 62 to 61. So in the grand scheme of things, a minor difference between the base and enhanced version. Now the reason why we're really looking to invest into a reload perk is because in that 4th column, the perk you probably noticed immediately is Voltshot. This is the perk that I think many of us were looking at on this weapon from the very beginning, for obvious reasons. But another perk that also gives us incredible reload speed is the new perk Air Trigger. It states that increased ammo reserves, and when airborne, accuracy and reload speed are increased, but target acquisition is decreased. Now inside of PvE, you're really only getting to use one of the benefits from this perk, as accuracy is not that big of a deal, but the reload speed is something extremely noticeable. Also, the ammo reserves doesn't really do anything here considering it's a primary weapon. Now in terms of reload speed increases though, it's going to grant plus 30 reload speed and a 0.8 times reload duration multiplier. This is undoubtedly fast. We're talking outlaw levels of fast without even needing to get a kill. This allows us to go from that base of 93 frames to get a reload to a whopping 48 frames. That is extremely fast. The only thing that people are going to have a problem with on Air Trigger is just working around its playstyle. You see, you don't have to stay in the air the entire time to get the reload benefit, but you do have to bunny hop in a way, or at least jump up in the air when you reload in order for it to proc and get that reload benefit. And if you mess up and you're on the ground, well then the perk is kind of a waste. This is one of those perks where it's like, yes, the benefits are substantial. You just got to remember to do it, and you got to program yourself to always remember to be airborne in some sort of way when going for that reload. Now the enhanced version of this perk doesn't really do anything here since it greatly increases ammo reserves, and considering this is a primary weapon, kind of a useless point there. Now the other perk I want to talk about is actually Eddy Current. It got a buff in the beginning of the final shape. Eddy Current reads that it temporarily increases reload speed and handling after sprinting or while amplified, and this effect is improved when you are amplified. Now the change that Bungie made to this is that it now takes 1.5 seconds of sprinting instead of 3 to get that activation. It also provides a bonus to handling and a 5% scaler on each stat at base, and being amplified will immediately activate the perk at its maximum effectiveness. Now what we mainly care about is of course the reload speed here. This is going to give us plus 20 to our reload stats and a 0.95 times reload duration multiplier, which brings our reload speed to 73 frames, which is a bit faster than base, but not by much, and definitely not as much as Air Trigger or Enlightened Action. However, when we are amplified, this gives us plus 60 reload speed. And this is when Eddy Current really pops out, because while amplified, we have plus 60 reload. And this drops our reload to 49 frames, literally matching that of Air Trigger. Now, as for the enhanced version, it reads that the effects are significantly improved when amplified. But Bungie, I don't know if you need to come back and like reword this, but at least in our testing, that significant improvement was a 1 frame difference. It went from 49 frames to get the reload to 48 frames. I don't know, it just kind of seems pointless to me. Not saying it's a waste of an Ascendant alloy, but at least from a reload perspective, there's minor differences between the base version of this perk and the enhanced version. Now, a few other perks to consider, one being Pugilist, which is going to give us 10% melee ability energy on kills, and dealing more melee damage also grants us plus 35 handling for 3 seconds, with the enhanced version giving us 11%. We also have high impact reserves, and this is one we're going to look at inside of PvP. This states that rounds at the end of the magazine deal more damage. Now, the reason why I was mentioning high impact reserves inside of PvP is that you can prime your weapon down. You can literally chew it down to the bottom half of the magazine, and you're going to be getting extra damage. And yes, there is a combo here on this pulse rifle that will allow you to 2 bursts. But inside of PvE, Corrasion does 3,059 damage per crit here against Carl, and once your mag reaches 50% capacity, it'll start dealing more damage, jumping up to 3,428 per crit, which is a 12.1% increase. But it continues to increase the deeper you go into your magazine, and will eventually cap out at 3,845 damage per crit, which is a 25% increase in damage. Now, for the enhanced version, the perk will begin to activate earlier, essentially at 55% of the mag versus 50%. Now, you can actually play around with this. You can increase your mag size of the weapon, which means you're going to have more shots to play with for that high impact reserve buff. Now, before you completely poop on this perk, keep in mind, guys, the beautiful thing is that this is a damage perk, which means with it being present in that 3rd column, you can pair it with another damage perk in that 4th column. And considering how strong this archetype already is inside of PvE, that's really good for Corrasion. Doesn't necessarily aid us in our reload speed, but it tacks on some extra damage. Now, this takes us to column 4. As mentioned earlier, the perk that we were most interested in is, of course, Voltshot. Voltshot reads that reloading this weapon after defeating a target overcharges the weapon for a short period of time, causing it to jolt on its next hit. This is a great perk, guys. Wonderful arc synergy, fantastic ad clearing capabilities. You get a kill, you reload, you'll then have Voltshot procced for the next 7 seconds, and that next hit will begin jolting that target. I think jolt damage might be my favorite because it's not just the ability to clear out ads like Incandescent, it's also the ability to just apply some extra damage to high health targets, and it can also stun overload champions. It's all around a fantastic perk, and the enhanced version of Voltshot allows the buff to be held for 8 seconds instead of 7. Now, I think most people are probably going to pick Voltshot on this thing. However, One for All is also present here, where hitting 3 separate targets increases damage for a moderate duration. This is a 35% increase in damage after hitting 3 separate targets, and it lasts for 10 seconds, or with the enhanced version, bumping this up to 11 seconds. A very solid damage perk, which of course you can combine with high impact reserves and literally double up with 2 damage perks there. The only downside for One for All is that you can't refresh it on itself. It lasts for 10 seconds, and then after the 10 seconds, you're gonna have to hit 3 more targets. Now, we also have Frenzy here, where being in combat for an extended time increases damage, handling, and reload speed until you're out of combat. This is a 15% damage buff after being in combat for 12 seconds. It also grants 100 handling and 100 reload speed, which is very nice. The problem is when I look at perks like Frenzy, all I can think about is why not just use Nullify with the raid perk Chaos Reshaped. Like, I know that's a raid weapon, but if I had to choose between Frenzy or Chaos Reshaped on this archetype of pulse rifle, I would choose Chaos Reshaped all day long. It's Voltshot that makes this stand out. Now, the other perk that we have to look at too, and we're definitely going to look at this one more in PvP, is High Ground. High Ground reads that final blows with this weapon grant stacks of bonus damage. Attacking targets from higher ground immediately grants the maximum number of stacks. Now, guys, High Ground got a rework at the start of the final shape, and I've been using it more and more on my weapons. Time Worn Wayfarer, we literally use it for PvP, and you'd be surprised how many places you can activate High Ground inside of PvP. But at 1 stack inside of PvE, this is going to be a 10% increase in damage. At 2 stacks, it's a 17.5%, and at 3 stacks, where it maxes out at a 25% increase in damage. Now, all 3 tiers are going to last for 7 seconds, but can be refreshed by getting kills. Again, the damage is not as high as something like One for All, but since the rework here where you can actually get High Ground to activate upon getting 3 kills, to reach that ×3 buff, it does have more ease of use than than what it had before. Now keep in mind, what high ground means is literally you 1 meter above your enemy. That's it. You're 1 meter above your enemy, you get instantly ×3. Now another interesting thing I found out is that you can proc high ground ×3 by being higher than the enemy. Then if you proceed to drop down to ground level, that buff will persist until the timer expires. So you can literally hop up, proc it, jump back down, boom. You've got 25% more damage. And in the same process, you can continue extending this buff by getting a kill or by just getting the high ground back again. It's literally Obi-Wan's perk. Now the enhanced version of high ground doesn't really do a whole lot. It just gives us +5 reload. Now before getting into our God Roll, I do want to touch on its origin traits. I really like this origin trait. This being Radiolaria Transposer. Rapid final blows causes targets to explode into a pool of Radiolarian fluids. Now this takes around 3 rapid kills on red bar enemies to then spawn this pool, with an elite or higher enemies spawning the pool every kill. Now the explosion from the proc and the subsequent pool don't really do a lot of damage, but you can build into it with artifact mods. The explosion though at base did a max of 5,808 damage, with the pool itself ticking for 2,017 damage if an enemy walks through it. Now with the origin trait being buffed by the artifact mod Logic Reductor, this allows weapons with the Radiolaria Transposer origin perk to deal increased damage to Vex, and it also extends the duration of those pools created by Radiolaria Transposer. It's a good perk in ad clearing content, guys, and we have ways in which we can build into it. I highly advise taking full advantage of it. And before you just completely poop on this origin trait, I can show you so many origin traits in the game that are, in my opinion, absolutely useless. This one to me is at least unique, and I hope Bungie continues adding more like these. Now, what is the God Roll for Corrasion for PvE? Guys, call me basic, but Voltshot is juice, man. It's too good for so many reasons. And if you're worried about damage, don't be. Pulse Rifle's got a huge buff. This archetype specifically does the most damage out of all the Pulse Rifles. Its DPS numbers far outweigh those others. So securing a kill is not going to be a problem here for Corrasion. And every time you do, and you get a reload, and you get Voltshot procced, it's only getting deadlier. Now, what is the best perk to pair in column 3? Well, I think Enlightened Action is a really easy one to proc. I think if you're like, hey, I don't want to worry about anything, I don't want to worry about getting amplified with Eddy Current, I don't want to jump in the air for air trigger, well, hell, guys, rock Enlightened Action. I think that's a pretty brain dead perk to take full advantage of. Alternatively though, Eddy Current, especially when you're amplified, is very, very good. I love the rework Bungie did here, and there's so many ways, even in Prismatic, where you could take advantage of being amplified. Hell, we've got Facet of Purpose, which will grant amplified on orb power pickups if you have an arc super equipped. Depending on your subclass, you probably have an aspect or two that also feeds into amplified, so there's ways to take advantage of it. Outside of that, air trigger is a perk that I would recommend. I would just say, hey, this is going to change your playstyle up. If you're used to literally just standing on the ground and you don't want to remember to ever hop whenever you go to get that reload, then obviously steer away from that perk. Now, with that being said, if you're looking to just fully commit to damage, just single target damage, well, hell, guys, you could do One for All, High Ground, or even Frenzy, and you could pair it with things like High Impact Reserves, literally double stacking those perks. Matter of fact, if you did One for All and High Impact Reserves together, on the bottom half of that magazine, you're literally able to increase your damage by 69%. Now, would I take this over Voltshot? No, I wouldn't. Now, for those wondering, this High Impact Reserves boosts Voltshot, meaning the jolt damage itself. At least from our testing, no, it doesn't appear so, guys. I was curious about it as well. But as far as wrapping up what the God Roll for PvE needs to be, I think for PvE, any of the reload perks with Voltshot is probably the route I would go with. Now, moving on to PvP. I actually really like this archetype in PvP, or more specifically, I like a single pulse rifle the most in PvP, that being Nullify. I think Nullify possesses some weird intrinsic ability to just snag crit after crit, and it's actually nutty how good that pulse rifle is in PvP, and no one is using it. I even liked Aisha's Care, although I think Nullify is even better than that. But Corrasion here, it doesn't seem to possess that ability to snag crits as easily. And it's weird because I've actually sat there and shot it against the wall, and it's almost like the weapon is coded as a 3-round burst pulse rifle. You can almost see the muzzle flash picking it up on the very end. It's like it's shooting a blank. It's weird, guys, but it throws you off. And I wouldn't be surprised if Bungie comes out in the next few weeks and says, hey, we're fixing this weapon. It actually has the recoil pattern of a 3-round burst pulse rifle, and that's why it feels like shite. This weapon on paper should be the best PvP pulse rifle in this archetype. Its base range of 75 reaches up to almost 37 meters. It can almost max out at 40 meters with 100 range, which you can easily hit. Its time to kill kill is 0.87 seconds, which I know isn't anything crazy, as you can achieve that in 5 crits in one body. But when we start to include things like high impact reserves, this starts to add more forgiveness. Still a 0.87 time to kill value, but from tier 6 resilience and below, it goes from 5 crits in one body to 4 crits in 2 body. Now, does this require you to be in the bottom half of your magazine? Yes. Not necessarily something I would do in 6v6, but in 1v1 scenarios, in Trials of Osiris, where I'm like going for a pick, I am not bashful about priming my weapons. Matter of fact, if you were to prime Corrasion down to its final 6 shots, it can actually kill a Guardian in 4 crits to body at tier 7 resilience and below. Now, I know that doesn't seem impressive. You're like, okay, Cross, I'm doing all this work, I'm priming my weapon down, who cares? Now let's talk high ground. High ground can be stacked here. Now, by itself, it can actually lower TTK values all on its own. For instance, tier 10 resilience and below at high ground times 2, you can get the kill in 5 crits, 0.8 seconds. At high ground times 3, you can get the kill on Guardians, still in 5 crits, 0.8 seconds, but it's at tier 3 resilience and below that it goes from 4 crits in one body. So a little bit of forgiveness. But then we incorporate high impact reserves in high ground times 3. This is able to get the kill in 5 crits, 0.8 seconds from tier 10 to tier 8 resilience. But then from tier 7 and below, it's able to do it in 4 crits in one body. Now, still 0.8 seconds, and I know this doesn't sound impressive. However, if you were to take this combination and stack it with an Empowering Rift, I literally ran around with Sanguine and was dropping Empowering Rifts, standing in them, you have the ability to 2-burst. Literally 2-burst a Guardian with this archetype, guys. Now, let me just say, it was hell to pull off, but I did get the 2-bursts, like one time. And yes, it's a beautiful thing to behold. I mean, you're killing a Guardian in 0.6 seconds. Bam, bam, done. And you've got pretty good range here at 40 meters to pull that off with some forgiveness. I'm probably over damaged here with high impact reserves. The question is all this work really worth it? I think if it was for Nullify, absolutely. Like, I would actually go through all these hoops for Nullify, go for the 2-burst every single time. And that pulse rifle at base is good enough that even if I mess up, I'm like, hey, I'm okay. I don't need these buffs. They're nice. It's great to pull off the 2-burst, but the weapon handles itself so well on its own that just using it at base is completely fine with me. The issue I have here with Corrasion is just that it feels bad. And I've spent a lot of time with Aisha's Care, and I've spent a lot of time with Nullify inside of PvP, both of those weapons. And I understand some of the dialogue around both of those, especially Aisha's Care, is that it just didn't feel good. Corrasion clearly feels worse than all 3 of those, at least from a PvP perspective. PvE, none of this stuff really matters. I'm just looking for a gun that's got good perks, and that's really what full sends it when choosing a God Roll for PvE. But for PvP, it really just comes down to the feel of the weapon. And all I can say, guys, is that Corrasion, despite on paper being the perfect pulse rifle for PvP, because I would have ate this up all day long, it just feels like poop. I don't know why. Bungie, please look at this weapon. I think something is wrong. If you guys have experienced that, please let me know. Don't just say, yes, Cross, Corrasion is garbage because this archetype is garbage in general. No, this archetype is very good. I love this archetype. I think it's the best in PvE, clearly. Mathematically, it is. But inside of PvP, everybody poops on this archetype, but it's solid. Corrasion, though, aids that argument that this is a shite archetype inside of PvP. And I'm curious to know if anyone else has felt that when using this pulse. With that being said, though, Corrasion is a phenomenal weapon inside of PvE. Looking at the DPS values that you see here on your screen, you could see clearly how much better this archetype is over other pulse rifles inside of PvE. So if you haven't gotten Corrasion, I highly advise going for it. Obviously, everybody's going to be all about Aberrant Action, and for good reason. That's a very good sidearm. We've already reviewed it if you want to check it out. But right after that, definitely grind for this one right here. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.